Hi scientists! Today we're going to talk a little bit more about the cell membrane. Our big idea for this lesson is that the structure of the cell membrane is such that it only allows some things through. So first we'll talk about the structure and then we'll talk about the language around what kinds of things can go through. We talk about two different models for our cell membrane, and the first is the lipid bilayer. Let's break down this word. So lipid means fat. The prefix bi means two, and then layer is layer. So it's a double layer, sort of a two layers of lipids, and this creates a membrane that is both strong and flexible. The cell membrane forms this way because of the structure of each individual lipid. So you can see it here, this little ghost-like friend in the box. And the lipid has what we call a hydrophilic head and a hydrophobic tail. So hydrophilic, the root words of that are hydro is water, and then philic is loving, so a water-loving part of the lipid. And this is the part that faces out into the world and then inside into the cell, both areas that have plenty of water in them. The tails are hydrophobic, phobic meaning afraid, right? You can think about being claustrophobic, afraid of small spaces. So hydrophobic, water-fearing. So the tails are on the inside of the cell membrane, in between the hydrophilic heads, so that they never have to touch the water that's both inside the cell and outside in the world. So here you can see that there's two layers of lipids. The heads face both out and in, and then the tails are caught in the middle. The second model that we use to understand the cell membrane is about the things that are part of the cell membrane that aren't lipids. So studded throughout the cell membrane, we have proteins. Some of these proteins go all the way through the double layer, and some are just kind of on half of the cell membrane, so maybe on the outside or on the inside. And these proteins are able to float around. They can move through the lipids. And so that's what we're thinking about in the word fluid, right? The proteins are fluid and able to move around along the surface of the cell. Mosaic refers to this sort of studded structure. So if you were to look at the surface of the cell with a microscope, of course, you would be able to see that the proteins are sort of all over the surface of the cell, just like tiles would be all over the surface of a mosaic to create the pattern or the picture. Some of these proteins have carbohydrates attached to them, and these act like ID tags or ID cards, and they help with cell signaling. They let cells recognize one another. And then some proteins, you can see that there's some proteins in the bottom picture that look sort of like channels. They allow things to move through the lipid bilayer. They act like little passages. So next I want to talk about permeability. And this is the ability of things to move through the membrane. But let's talk about it with something that's more familiar to us first. So when you look outside and you look at the weather, you choose what kind of jacket or coat is appropriate for the day. If it's a pretty nice day, you might just choose a regular jacket. But if it's raining or windy, that's not going to work because the rain and the wind will be able to go through that jacket. Right? That jacket is permeable to the wind and the rain. So we might choose a windbreaker or we might choose a raincoat. And in that case, for a raincoat, the jacket is impermeable to the rain. The rain can't go through, so you stay nice and dry. So if the structure allows things through, right, we say it's permeable. And if the structure doesn't allow things through, we say it's impermeable. So if a substance can cross our cell membrane, then we say that cell membrane is permeable to that substance. So for example, water, the cell membrane is permeable to water. Water can pass easily through the membrane. And then if a substance cannot cross, we say the membrane is impermeable. We talk about the cell membrane as being selectively permeable, which means that some materials can cross and others cannot. And whether things can cross depends on how big they are. So water is a relatively small molecule, it can cross easily. But something like glucose would need a special channel because it's a really big molecule. And then charge. So if we have positively or negatively charged molecules or atoms, then they may or may not be able to cross based on that charge. That's it for today. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below.